your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Our next segment on today's show is me looking at some running back busts. Continue the comments. I love it, guys. I love the comment production, the interaction that I get to have with you guys. Cam, if you are still watching, I do want to get you included into the show. Hit me with your trade that you just finalized. I'm really excited to see the terms that you got with that trade. But we will continue with our segments for today. We're looking at some running back busts. Now, we talked about a lot of running backs throughout the week. We talked about some concerns. Let's take the Jarczyk. Another comment from him. Fantastic. Continue them going. Zach Moss versus Najee Harris. Who to start there? That's another interesting question. I really like the fact that the Bengals are taking a committee approach in their room, playing the Pats, like I said, a defense who can really exploit in many different ways, and then looking at Najee Harris, who's starting against Atlanta, another one of those defenses who I think you can exploit as well. But let's just look at the profile of both of these running back rooms, right? That's what I think that this specific kind of question comes down to, Jake. You look at Zach Moss in the Bengals running back room. I think that he's going to get the bulk of the carries. He brings a lot of versatility as a receiver out of the backfield for Joe Burrow. If you look at Najee Harris, he also presumptively will have the majority of the carries, but he's against a guy in Jaylen Warren who has more explosiveness and excitement in this Pittsburgh offense. That's why I'm going to kind of reluctantly take Zach Moss here, because this is an interesting narrative. Having two guys who are in very competitive kind of running back rooms. We'll talk about these two running back rooms next week as well, as we look around the NFL and do some deep dives into them. Zach Moss and Najee Harris, in many ways, could be seen as similar players in similar situations, but at face value, the matchup, the fact that Zach Moss has so much versatility, leads me to believe that he should be your week one starter. I think that Najee is going to be one of those guys that either grows into the season or will get less and less touches as the season go on, as Pittsburgh tries to decipher how to make their offense more dynamic. So I really love this question. It's very interesting talking about deep running back rooms and talking about who are the presumptive lead backs there. So thank you for that question, Jake. Looking at some of the busts, though, looking at some guys who I think you should avoid. All three of these guys who I have are also in interesting running back situations. But the difference between them and some guys who offer more hope and optimism, like maybe a Zach Moss, is that they're either getting older or they still haven't found levels of consistency that would allow them to profile as high-end running backs for fantasy football managers. And especially this first guy who I'm going to talk about, Tony Pollard, he profiles as someone who's either going to be hit or miss, because the Titans really don't know what they're getting. They feel like he could be an RB1 in this offense, but I think that a lot of fantasy football managers should be apprehensive about him. He did last year have a career high in touches, 307, but he only had 13.1 fantasy points per game to show for it. He has to share the backfield with a guy who I really love, have sung his praises all summer long on this show, Tyjae Spears. And in the profile of this Titans offense, I think that Will Levis just has more comfortability with Spears as well. Tony Pollard, I think he adds a lot of value kind of as a situational back. I like him as kind of a workhorse back early on in downs. But at the end of the day, it's all about rapport for a young quarterback like Will Levis. And the rapport he built with Tyjae Spears cannot go unnoticed. I think he has a wide receiver core that will allow him to be confident with guys like Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, who had experience in this league, even though they're getting up there in age, should really help him out as well. So Tony Pollard is someone who I'm kind of fading for this season. I wish the best for him. I think in a new team, I want him to do well, but this running back room is very crazy. Another comment, keep them coming, Jake. Brian Thomas Jr. switching over to the wide receiver world, or Xavier Worthy to start. Now this one is exciting because both of these guys are rookies who I love, especially Xavier Worthy as a Texas fan, watching him and his growth at Texas. And then Brian Thomas Jr., kind of one of those, not necessarily one-season wonders over at LSU, but someone who really burst onto the scene, brings a lot of excitement. Again, I know the Xavier Worthy matchup, but I'm not sure who the Jaguars play. I believe they are playing within their division as well. You'll have to let me know. But in terms of both of these offenses, that's how I'm going to break this one down. I think that Xavier Worthy makes more sense in the Chiefs' offense, but Brian Thomas Jr. will be more highly coveted in the Jags' offense. As Tap to Learn, fantastic. Thank you for updating me with all these games. Jacksonville plays Miami. That is correct. I did have that in my notes, but it just slipped my mind. I think that if we look at matchups, right, Jacksonville, Miami, Chiefs, Ravens, you would probably take Brian Thomas Jr. from face value because it's the lesser of two evils. I like both the Miami and Baltimore defenses, but Miami certainly seems like the lesser of two evils there. But let's talk about how, like I said, the offenses impact. I think that Xavier Worthy just makes more sense. He might not get the lion's share of targets. He still has to look up at Travis Kelce, Marquise Hollywood Brown, another experienced receiver in that Chiefs wide receiver room. But at the end of the day, there's so many different ways you can use Xavier Worthy. Like I said, I'll use his Texas experience as kind of the barometer for what I think of him. He's used in punt returns. He's a savvy route runner. He's not just all speed. He can do so many different things. He kind of is their new Tyreek Hill. Whereas Brian Thomas, I've talked about the Jags wide receiver room. They've always been this kind of receiver room predicated on speed and not necessarily route running. That's why I don't necessarily like them. But if you were to put a gun in my head and say, choose between these two guys for week one alone, I think Brian Thomas, even though it's the riskier option, is the guy for week one. And Tap to Learn says as well, agrees with my sentiment. I like Thomas based on opponent as well. That's what I'm saying. For the overarching narrative, I would keep Worthy on my team, maybe as a flex guy, because he could project to be someone who is useful in many different regards, whether it be in touchdowns, yardage. He's not just going to be kind of like John Ross or something, another guy who had a fantastic 40 time. I think that Xavier Worthy is a bona fide wide receiver. So that being said, though, keep him on your bench for now and start Thomas. Let's get back to some running back busts here. I love the fact that, we get to talk about these young rookies, but let's get back to some other guys in terms of running backs who I really like or don't like to start the season to avoid. Devon Achane has always been one of them. For some reason, even though I want to like him as he enters his second year in the NFL, I just can't look past the fact that the Miami Dolphins are really hinging on him or contingent on him to just be a speed guy and have that explosiveness be the best part of his game. I just can't get past that aspect because every single player on that Miami Dolphins offense is explosive. Whether it be Tyreek Hill catching the football, whether it be Raheem Mostert as well, even though he's getting up there in age. Jalen Waddle as their wide receiver too. Everyone is so explosive. And when I look at Devon Achane, I think that this season, much like a Kyron Williams almost, was a kind of an aberration where I don't think he's going to get as many touches. I don't think, he's going to get as many looks. So, Devon Achane, it's not necessarily about, the player that he is. I just think it's an unsustainable thing for him to continue what he did last year, because what he did last year was ridiculous in terms of the speed and pace he set, in terms of his yards after contact, in terms of things like that nature. So I just don't see him continuing that. Let's throw out a stat here. Actually, we'll leave the stats there because I just don't necessarily think that these stats are attainable. Our final guy, as Jake the Chart Chick says, I picked Achane as my RB2, but grabbed Mostert as a safety pick in case things don't work. I'm sorry to say, Jake, I don't necessarily agree with either of those guys as your running back position. I don't necessarily like the Miami Dolphins as a fantasy team outside of Tyreek Hill either. And while as much as I want to appreciate, Achane and Mostert for what they did last year, it's just untenable. I just don't see how you, A, kind of figure out touches with both of these backs and what both of them bring in terms of speed, and B, the whole profile of their offense. As Shep Easy Sweet Spot says, Tua is a big part and factor in that, and how, they use Tua as kind of an X factor to get their running backs going. But I love Tua more than Achane and Mostert because he just has to throw to them. Achane and Mostert's job is a little bit harder because of how they are perceived in this offense, if that makes any sense to you, Jake. So, out of both of them, though, I think Mostert is kind of more of the RB1, if you want my honest opinion here. But both of those guys, I don't necessarily see continuing their fantasy pace and production. But our last guy in terms of running back busts is another guy kind of in a better situation than others, but still not someone who is really exciting in terms of the fantasy football market. And that is Rachaad White out of Tampa Bay. He does have a lot of volume. My thing with him is that it's not good volume. It's not volume that produces yards. It's not volume that produces that many touchdowns. On 64 carries, he only averaged 3.6 yards per carry. Was the running back 36 in terms of that statistic. And then, if you look at what's happening in the Bucs camp, a lot of hype has been talked about with their 125th pick in this year's draft, Bucky Irving. I like him a lot in terms of the depth out of Oregon, a speed back, also fantastic in receiving, worked in an offense where it was very electrifying at Oregon. So, even though Rachaad White profiled as someone who's going to get the lion's share of touches in that Tampa Bay Buccaneers backfield, I don't necessarily think production is going to be his thing. And that's what all these running backs worry me about. That's what, always worries me in terms of how to decipher running backs. Because, as we talked about all week, they are going to be an interesting position group to look out for. But these busts are just guys who either are in weird situations, I don't like their production, or they just don't profile anymore as guys who I would trust at an RB1 or RB2 position. So that's just my take on how to look at these guys moving forward. That will just about do it for this segment. Thank you for all the comments as well. Coming up next, our fourth segment of the day, we'll be looking at the wide receiver position and some sleepers there for you right after this quick break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts.